Hi everyone, this week we are talking about this big question. How can the rigor of evidence based practice be effectively communicated and instilled in counseling students? So, the overall topic being integrating evidence based practice into teaching. So, rather than just teach you about teaching, I thought I'd bring in the concept of evidence based practice into that. Before I begin, I do want to mention that this week was a little bit harder to put together because when I went into the literature, there's not a ton on how to teach evidence based practice. One thing that I think is somewhat limited in our field is how do we actually teach people to do psychotherapy? If you go into our journals, not a ton is written on how to actually do psychotherapy. My hope is that many of you who are going to be doing research might actually look at how do we increase outcomes by teaching students how to engage in evidence-based practice. So what I want to do is I pulled off of the ACES teaching briefs off of it was the fifth journal. So you can see here where I pulled this off of. These are open source. So you can even Google ACES teaching briefs and you can find all these. So I pulled a lesson off of each of these. And this week I want you to read these because I think reading these teaching briefs can get us to think about how we can teach different concepts, how we can really drive to evidence based practice. So, again, we talked about this, but what is evidence based practice? It improves client outcomes backed by ethics and our accrediting body, KCREB. Students need more than just good vibes to guide their practice. So, we spent some time unpacking this, but I want to remind us why it's important that we really teach our future counselors. One of the first articles in the journal was this idea of playful pedagogy. How do we bring in play and connection, foster deeper engagement with learning, even when teaching serious topics like evidence based practice? So, we want to think about using role plays, creative metaphors, friendly competition to help students enjoy learning how to read, apply, and evaluate different interventions. In the classroom, can you go ahead and think about bringing things to life? If you're going to teach the choice point from acceptance and commitment therapy, how can you make that as fun as possible? How can you have them do a role play doing that? Evidence based practice is best absorbed through structured self reflection, really getting us to think about applying different things and then reflecting, is that working the way that I want it to work? Especially using tools like Flip that let students document their growth over time. So you can read more in the brief, but Flip is assigning Flip video reflections where students explain their rationale for selecting interventions and cite research, essentially practicing evidence based practice out loud. So rather than having folks do another reflection, they can go ahead and reflect using video based upon recording themselves. Kind of cool. The six hat trick, you can go ahead and look at this brief. It's teaching students to analyze client cases through multiple cognitive lenses and helps them move beyond intuition to methodological evidence based thinking. So use the hats and case studies to have students discuss their perspectives. One hat could be, what does the research say here? Another hat could be like, where does your emotion want to go? So read that because the six hats is a teaching approach where students practice putting on different hats. Another way that we can teach evidence based practice, but again, I think you're picking up that it could be any concept, is through pop media. Students grasp evidence based practice better when it's tied to emotionally compelling, realistic stories, like those found in true crime, pop culture docuseries. So maybe this week you are binging Law and Order SVU to find the best clips that you can use. Using documentaries or streaming series as mock client cases and having students link observations to diagnostic criteria and interventions from peer reviewed studies. So we have to bring it to life. And I really think using pop media is another thing that we can do. Another way is story. To teach evidence based practice, we need to cultivate students' identities as researchers, not just as consumers of research. So we need to invite students to write or share a research origin story, a moment when they saw the power of data or evidence to help someone, and tie this into evidence matters and real world counseling. So I remember getting referred a client, and the stakes were high. They were in the process of losing rights to their child. And in that, it became really challenging because I started working with there. And when I was working with this client, I really noticed that they have not been getting evidence based treatment from a provider. So, what did I do? I went ahead and started to think about what diagnoses might this person have. And it became clear that this person didn't meet the criteria for a certain DSM 5 diagnosis. I'm not going to say it because I want to protect confidentiality. But what I did is my hunch was that. But as professional counselors, even though we can diagnose, I thought it would be significantly better if we got a full battery to support that diagnosis. So engaged in some case management to get them a psychological evaluation. And sure enough, that psychological evaluation came back with the diagnoses that I thought were helpful. Now, why is this important? Because to the courts, the argument was you all should really give this client a try and really allow them to access evidence based practice for this diagnosis before you do something so radical. So I know that many professional counselors don't love diagnosing, and I also recognize that we really love counseling through our hearts. But in this scenario, and in this story, you're seeing how diagnosis and then actually bringing in a specialist that can engage in evidence based practice really did help this client out. So, again, bringing in story, just like I did, can really help bring things to life. So that is different ways that we might bring evidence-based practice alive. I want you all to think about how you might be able to teach this, because when students get into practicum, they've had a lot of classes, but they haven't necessarily always relied on evidence-based practice. So I need your help teaching the future generation evidence-based practice. Will you help me?